The hard part right now, to be honest, is we have this spaghetti monster of a code base. Just the client app alone is about 1.8 million tokens. It's a mess, and there's multiple ways to do things. You try to fix one problem, you create fix one bug.
Game of whack-a-mole.
Yeah, whack-a-mole. And what I've been doing for the last week and a half is trying to create an intermediate representation of the code base that is explains how it all works and how all the pieces are related. I have a thing that does, I have that. Is any of it accurate? I don't know, right? And so what I've been working on is trying to build a validation system that can go through and actually verify the accuracy of every single claim in this compressed representation so that I know I have a bulletproof, rock solid explanation of how the whole thing works.
Matt, thanks so much for coming on the show today. Matt and I are founder friends. We share a mutual investor, Jesse Middleton at Flybridge. And you're the founder of TalkTastic, which I'm so excited to hear more about this. I've been a user of TalkTastic for, quite a while now, probably 6+ months. And it's changed the way I work. It's bravo, hell of a freaking product, man. And thanks again for coming on the show. This is going to be a fun conversation.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. And I always love it when I meet people who use TalkTastic because, when you're building a product, you get so in the weeds of all the problems you have to solve. And then I kind of pop up and people are like, oh my God, it's changed my life. And it always feels good. And it reminds me why I do what I do.
So the impetus for us doing this now, we've known each other for quite a while now, is you just published this Substack post titled something like, I fired my product team and replaced them with AI. That happened right around the same time that another fun user story. One of my best friends wound up breaking both hands. Like he's a total mess right now, and he's a salesperson. So emails are his life. And I told him about you. He works at a company that's probably too big for me to name without them getting in trouble for him using a tool like yours without permission. But it's been a godsend for him. So between this really cool Substack post of yours and just seeing someone else experience this for the first time, it was like, showing someone Uber for the first time. He's like, holy crap, this is insane. I'm going to use this once I get my hands back. This is going to be a fun one. So again, maybe to start, for people that aren't users like I am, what is TalkTastic?
Yeah, so TalkTastic is a Mac app and system extension for speech to text, but it goes beyond traditional transcription. And a way to think about it is like Instagram filter for your speech or for your thoughts. It transcribes what you say, but it looks at your screen while it's doing that. And so it understands what you're trying to do, fixes all the errors that would show up in a traditional sort of speech to text or transcription tool, but it also rewrites what you say to still be in your voice, but be clear and fit the format and context of whatever you're doing. It tries to improve. It's like what glasses do to the world, so you can see the rest of the world. TalkTastic does that for what comes out of your mouth and when you write.
It's putting it in a little more context for listeners who haven't tried it yet. I think a perfect example is I'll use it when I'm texting my wife and I'm on my computer. So I'm using iMessage on my Mac. And it knows how we talk to each other. And it knows that when I say Mare, that I mean the short version of her name, and is able to spell that the way that I typically spell it. Or contrasting that, I was emailing with my bookkeeper today, and she has an interesting spelling of the name Karen, and it is able to understand that spelling and appropriately write an email for talking to my bookkeeper versus talking to my wife casually in a chat message. It's wild how contextually aware it is and how accurate it is, and getting my voice right, even though it's not verbatim my voice. It's pretty wild.
Yeah, and that's kind of part of my core thesis with AI is that these tools, these technologies, they're really powerful if they actually understand the context of what you're trying to do. But most people underinvest in the upfront work that's required to get these tools to actually deliver what you want. And what we've done with TalkTastic is you just press a button, you talk, you can ramble, short note, long note, and it just understands what you're trying to do. It has the context of your screen, so you don't have to do the work. We do that for you. We kind of bake it in. And it's just designed to be seamless and sort of work everywhere. And you don't have to think. Like the way I think about it is like, we're trying to compete with your keyboard. Right? Like that's the main thing we're trying to do. We're trying to replace 80% of what you do on the keyboard. That's my aspiration for the product. It's really a new kind of interface that's voice first, but it's not voice only.
Mm-hmm. And that it not being verbatim is so on my phone, I'm a big, just like dictation guy. And especially I'm in New York City and it's freezing cold and any chance I can get not to take my hands out. But when I'm using my phone, I have to know exactly what I'm saying and I have to get the words right and has to understand verbatim what I'm saying, or else I'm, fumbling to try to fix things. Where with TalkTastic, it can be like, hey, Matt, what time do you want to do the podcast episode? Oh, wait, we already scheduled a time. Okay, I'll see you tomorrow. And like it doesn't say all that stuff. It understands what I was actually meaning to say and skips all that crap about scheduling and knows to just send the reminder or whatever. It's wild how accurate it is. So heck of a tool. Let's talk about how you built it. So maybe to start, what was the title of that Substack article? Is it like verbatim? I fired my product team and replaced them with AI. Is that what you did?
That's it. I think that's it.
So what happened? What'd you do? Why'd you do it?
Well, to be honest, it came from a bit of a place of frustration. We sort of created this market, and we're the first to market with sort of context-aware speech to text. And we started working on this product in January of 2024, and we just were not executing at the speed that I expected or wanted. We had the core of something great, the average user across our user base has created 100 voice recordings. Wow. Of all, including people who used it once, never went away. Like the engagement's been kind of insane, but we just haven't been executing. And over the last, call it 4 or 5 months, I jumped in and started digging into the code. We started scaling, our back end started falling down, and I just started digging in with, okay, well, how can I contribute at a lower level here and solve some of these technical problems? And I found myself using AI in basically novel ways and trying to share that with the team. And, there was some interest sometimes, but I saw a lot of resistance, and I saw, because what I think most people do is they'll use it, what I call like a Google plus plus. They'll have like a very superficial usage. They'll ask something, and then if they don't get what they want right away, they'll say, "Oh, screw this. I'll just do it the old way." Mm-hmm. Well, for me, I've always been kind of the idea guy, the business guy. And over the years, I've gotten progressively more and more technical. But I was not able to do it the way that they did it. So I had to sort of go ham and deep dive into these AI tools and kind of invent new ways of using them. And eventually I got so frustrated that I realized that the people in the company, they didn't really believe in AI like I did. They just had a fundamentally different conception of it. Mm-hmm. And it was this process over, let's say, a couple months, but of me really realizing that we're just not aligned. And we tried this sort of fix one bug at a time approach, and it was creating a lot of problems. We had a lot of technical debt. We basically had an engineer that I fired, brought in someone new, and that guy was like, "Whoa, this is a mess. This code base is a mess." I I don't understand half of why he made these decisions. Um, and things, instead of speeding up, they slowed down. And it was clear that we had to take a very different approach than what we'd been doing. And it was also clear that these were not the people to do that. And so I just said, instead of telling other people how to do their job and annoying them, I'm just going to do it myself, because I think me plus one engineer with AI is going to be way more effective and move much faster than sort of the old way of doing things, which is kind of insane.
Mm-hmm.
And, I don't know if it's going to work, but it was just clear that there's no way we were going to win if we just kept doing what we're doing. We were on this slow road to losing, and I don't like losing, and I don't go down without a fight.
So the team is gone, and right now it's you and one AI engineer whose focus is more on the approach and kind of empowering you than it is on building TalkTastic. Do I have that right?
Not really.
Okay.
So this is the guy's name is Emil. He is an extremely talented AI researcher, an engineer, entrepreneur, and he's been training models and doing AI research for us. And
he was doing that before, like he's been with you for a while in that capacity.
Yeah.
Okay.
He was with us for sort of like 4 years, and then we changed direction a couple months ago. I brought him on board sort of as part-time contractor, as we wanted to go deeper in sort of training models and not just be sort of a thin wrapper there. Mm-hmm. And so now we're working together, and it's the thing I love working with him is that instead of being annoyed when I come up with these, like crazy ideas, I tell him about something the next day. He's like, oh, so I took your idea and here, I made a better version of this, and it's a very different dynamic instead of sort of some resistance and, people getting annoyed, like, there he goes again, like more about Perplexity or Claude or whatever. He gets into it, and we've mostly spent our time talking about how to train models and build data sets and AI research. And so now I'm also bringing him more into the actual product development side, and we're working together. But it's very much a partnership rather than him enabling me, if that makes sense.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. I'd love to hear, can you walk through the specific actions that you took that got you to the point that you are today? What are the things that you had to do to create the environment where you could build a company this completely new and novel way?
Yeah. So, I think it goes back to why I fired the team and when I realized I had the wrong people. So in August, the voice speaking time increased 600%.
Oh, wow.
In a month. And then
that was just a ton of new users, or people using more, or where'd that come from?
People using it more. Okay. And it was some more new users, but just the engagement. Like, we have users who create 100 voice notes a day. Wow. I think our top user has created 335 voice notes in a single 24-hour period. So it is bananas. And people are using it in all these ways that are unexpected. And so our backend started failing. Uh-huh. And my co-founder was going on paternity leave. And so, we're about to be down a body at exactly a time when we needed people, we needed more. And so what I did is Gemini 1.5 Pro had just come out, which has a 2 million token context window. And I said, well, maybe what if I could just throw our whole code base into Gemini and see what it says? And using Zapier, I created a script that basically turned our whole code base into a single CSV file. And I uploaded it to Gemini, and it just barely fit in the context window. And I started asking questions. And I was like, hey, so what do you think of this code base? Give me your, no BS take. And I prompted it. So one of the things I do is I create these synthetic personas. When I work with AI, I don't just sort of use out of the box vanilla ChatGPT or Claude. Mm-hmm. I put a lot of effort into the system prompt and kind of create an identity for it. Like, you're the world's greatest, Mac OS engineer. You worked for Steve Jobs at Next, and then you went to Apple, and you've been part of Mac OS development from literally the founding of it, and stuff like that. And so I took our code base, I gave it to Gemini, and it told me, it's like, this code base screams of something that's been developed organically with no architecture, and I was like, uh-oh. And so I started digging in more, and I started asking more questions, and I took different parts of the code base and I started asking more questions, and I was just, I started getting more feedback where I was like, oh no, I don't have the team I thought I had, and before I would be dependent on asking my co-founder, asking people, and at some point maybe I had questions, but I kind of would hit a wall. I didn't have the time to investigate. I didn't have the time, but now suddenly I had these superpowers. And so then I started finding bugs myself, and I had suspicions. And whereas before I would have suspicions and maybe raise it to an engineer and kind of couldn't do anything about it, now I started debugging things myself and finding things that, I'd been told, oh, that's not a bug, that couldn't be a bug. And actually it was. And so I basically, with these LLMs, I started being able to do real engineering work in a way I'd never been able to. And it caused me to start questioning the team. And over time, I got better and better at it and learned how to use it in new ways. And I started developing more of these personas. So like on the AI side, I have an Ilya Sutskever persona, which is, who's the co-founder of OpenAI and sort of considered the world's top AI researcher. When I want to talk AI research, I talk to Ilya. When I need startup advice, I talk to Paul Graham. And I have a chief of staff that's the most amazing chief of staff in the world. It's a Claude project, worked for Steve Jobs and Zuck. Now it's working for me. And the way I can describe it is, I imagine what our ancestors felt like when they were walking around on the plains and the Neolithic plains as hunter-gatherers. And then one day someone says, I'm going to try to ride one of those big deer-looking thing without the horns and rides a horse. And I feel like I've gone from walking to riding a horse. I'm no longer a pedestrian. I'm like an equestrian. I'm like traveling at a gallop, and it's been transformative, and it's been so empowering for me. And so, yeah, the last 4 or 5 months have been transformative for my life, for my career. Suddenly, all these things that I used to want to do, but as CEO, I didn't have time to spend 6 weeks figuring out how to do. I could just start doing them and making shit happen and being able to move faster than my team, quite frankly. And once I saw that me with AI was doing things that my team wasn't able to do on their own, that's when I realized I don't have the right people. I need to make a change. And so honestly, my biggest regret is probably not doing it sooner, you know, uh, probably is a couple months too late, a couple months later than I should have. Um, it took a while because it's such a crazy idea that I would replace my whole engineering team with, a menagerie of Perplexity, Claude, Gemini, O1, these different LLMs. But yeah, I definitely no regrets except not doing it sooner.
What's been the hardest part so far? Like, has this, I know we're hearing this, like, now that we're in this state and what you're describing, I'm just insanely jealous of. Like, founder to founder, holy shit, I wish I had those capabilities, and I can't wait to get off this call and start trying to get those capabilities for myself. What's the hard part? Like, what made this? How long did it take you to get from where you started to where you are now? What were the challenges that you had to overcome to get AI to work in this way for you?
I'll tell you the best hack. The best hack is in my sort of system instructions. After I always have a structure. So one is I don't tell it what to do. I define an identity for it. So whether it's Ilya Sutskever, whether it's Paul Graham, I just imagine what is the globally ideal person in the world that I would want to help me with this problem or the category problems. And I either name that person if they have a name, or I describe them, or both. And the second thing I do is I say, don't answer right away. Ask me questions and force me to explain myself, and wait to answer until you get enough context and information from me to actually give me a good answer. And basically, I tell the AI to prompt me. And so I think the way that these chatbots, AI systems have been designed, they're designed to be answer systems,
Mm-hmm.
answer machines, like quickest to answer, right? Like Google. But the problem is most people are terrible at explaining what they actually want. And if the AI doesn't have the context of what you're doing, it'll give you an answer. It'll go off and, but it's not going to give you a good answer of what you need, right? If you ask a human to do this stuff, if you say, hey, could you, go get me some coffee, maybe they know what kind of coffee you want, but I ask, do you want cream, sugar? They're going to have questions, right? And if you ask a more complicated task, they have a lot more questions. They're not just going to do something, because it'd be pretty frustrating if they did that. And so getting the AI to prompt me, and where I do a lot more explaining and talking, that has unlocked the most. That is probably the biggest unlock. The third part of my structure is then I give it as much background information about what I'm doing, where I've at, so it knows, and so I don't have to explain. I try to explain as much as I can about what I'm trying to do, and I invest a lot up front. So that's been the unlock. And then I use TalkTastic. That's the other thing, is I use TalkTastic all the time, and I just talk, right? I'm not typing this stuff out, and I can ramble on for 5 minutes and explain myself, and TalkTastic will take it and clarify it and simplify it, and I get better responses that way. But the hard part right now, to be honest, is we have this spaghetti monster of a code base, and just the client app alone without like third-party packages is about 1.8 million tokens. And it's a mess, and there's multiple ways to do things. You try to fix one problem, you create you create
Just
fix
a
one bug, you
game
create
of
two more.
whack-a-mole. Yeah.
Yeah, whack-a-mole. And it's too big to put it in the context window of an LLM. And there's tools like Cursor, and they use RAG, retrieval augmented generation. They use these. They're good for code completion, but what I need to be able to do is I need to be able to reason over the whole system and think at a higher level. And so what I've been doing for the last week and a half is trying to create an intermediate representation of the code base that is explains how it all works and how all the pieces are related. Now, I have a thing that does, I have that. Is any of it accurate? I don't know, right? And so what I've been working on is trying to build a validation system that can go through and actually verify the accuracy of every single claim in this compressed representation so that I know I have a bulletproof, rock solid explanation of how the whole thing works. And then I could dump that thing into Claude and, take it from 1.8 million tokens to maybe 30 or 40K tokens. So roughly like a 20x compression. And because I think if I have that compressed representation where it fits in the context window, it's not too big, then anything I do after that is going to be way easier and way faster if Claude or DeepSeek or whatever system I'm using actually is able to understand how the system works. Because humans have the same problem, right? I asked this engineer I had, I was like, hey, let's maybe step back and let's just create a drawing. And he was like, whoa, that would take like weeks, just because he is just so, because of how complex the system is. So in my particular situation, I have a lot of complexity that I'm dealing with, and trying to distill that and boil that down to something that's easy for humans and AI to understand without getting lost. Because these LLMs, if you give them too much context, they'll get lost, and they'll give you something, but the accuracy just kind of falls off a cliff and you can't trust it. And so that's kind of been step one for me, is how do I create this? Another way to think about it is like, if you're trying to build an autonomous system, an autonomous car, one way is you have the car that can kind of localize itself, map itself, drive around, and you need that for a world that's dynamic. But a code base like this, it's static. So you could just have a really hyper accurate map of the code base, and then you don't need to have a super smart car that can drive around. And so that's kind of how I think about it, is like mapping the system, understanding exactly how it works so that I can understand it, so that ML, so that Claude, so that any AI model can understand it, but do that in a way that's actually accurate, which again is quite hard because of how complex and the overall system is. And the guy that built it no longer works here. So, I don't have the ability to just say, hey, is this right?
Yeah.
And that's hard, but it's also fun.
So tell me, you mentioned earlier that you'd asked one of the engineers, like, hey, let's just go to a whiteboard and map this thing out. First question, can you ask, like, have you asked, I assume so, the AI to go to its virtual whiteboard and map this thing out? And do you have that like diagram of this is how the code base works that AI was able to create for you?
Yeah, that was basically the first thing I did.
Okay, and that's all done by and I guess to the point of accuracy, yeah. So how do you know? What do you have a synthetic persona for? Like you were the best QA engineer ever, and like how do you know that you're right or wrong with any of this?
Yeah, so this actually goes back to a company that I started a long time ago that was doing crowdsourced video transcription. And we were using Mechanical Turk. Amazon Mechanical Turk, which is like a crowdsourced microtask platform.
And is this like
it's a very similar problem.
Models? Is
you have these people
like
doing stuff.
Claude one thing and Gemini another thing? Or you
are
ask
they right?
synthetic
are they
personas
just,
different things?
Is any of it accurate? How do you ensure quality? You don't know. And so we ended up. This is not the problem I set out to solve with that company, but we end up spending all this effort trying to build systems of QA and validation of humans. And basically, I'm using the same approach there, or same approach now that I developed back then, where basically I have one person do something, and then we would have multiple people validate that it's been done correctly. So basically, I'm doing the same thing with LLMs. Say, okay, here's a claim, here's the whole code base, validate that it's done accurately, and then if they all agree with each other, then we say it's accurate. Well, for us, the only model that I have access to that can do this is Gemini with its 2 million. Yeah. And so just getting agreement of this sort of this validation step, and we do it recursively. So it's basically like an agentic workflow where it's iterating it's QAing it, iterating it, and then until it agrees with itself that it's accurate. And it doesn't agree with itself very often, so I'm probably about 30% of the way there through the code base so far.
Is there something that like feels like every week there's some new news, some new model, something new that's changing in the AI landscape? You can continue to iterate the way that you have been, but I get the feeling from what you're describing that, you and I are going to be chatting one week and you're going to be like, oh, Google just came out with this feature in Gemini and this thing that I've been trying to do is now just magically solved. Is there something that you're waiting that you think is like on the horizon for one of these larger players in the space that could be a huge unlock for this approach that you're taking?
I was just at a decentralized AI conference on Friday, and there was someone talking about scaling the context window and making the context windows of these LLMs larger and more accurate. If someone can figure that out, then I think that will be a breakthrough for my specific problem. Okay. My problem is it's just so much context. It's the same reason that it's hard for a human to look at and understand and wrap their head around is the same reason it's hard for these LLMs, because there's so much and it's not well organized, right? If it was well organized, well, then we probably I wouldn't have this problem, right? So if it was easy for a human to do, then I wouldn't need the AI to do it, because it's basically impossible for a human to do on any sort of reasonable time frame. My opinion, that my only hope is getting AI to do it, and the bigger the context the bigger that these context windows are, and the more accurately they can sort of pull stuff from these big context windows. That's for my problem. Now, there's probably lots of other problems that I don't have to solve right now, and maybe they'll be my problem next week. But this is the one problem I have to solve: is how do I understand this fucking spaghetti monster of a code base and reduce it down to something that is clear, easy to understand, that I can understand, that other humans can understand, that Claude can understand, and do so accurately. Shouldn't be that hard, but it's actually a lot of work.
No, it sounds pretty hard. How have you thought about how would you do it if you were to start over today? Like, is now that you have this like magical understanding of how AI works, I've never met a founder who's taken the approach you have. Even if we're a different company, let's say TalkTastic doesn't exist and you're going to build your next startup. Do you need a team? Can this approach that you've taken write the code from day one and get everything right the first time?
I've been thinking a lot about that.
I'm sure.
Because I'm playing on hard mode right now, right?
Yeah.
Like paying down technical debt is like the worst, right? Like starting from scratch is much easier than what I'm doing right now. And so for me personally, I would want a very small team. I would spend much smaller team, maybe me, one, two other people max. I mean, I like having another human that I can talk through, sanity check some of these things, especially because, for me, I'm at the knee of the learning curve, and it's very easy to write bad software with AI. And so as much as an AI maximalist as I am, I'm also a realist, and I know that there's big gaps. And so I would do most of it just myself. And one other senior person that I trust who's super into AI and this approach, which I've been surprised. Like I'd expect more people to be sort of rah on the AI train, especially in the world of AI startups. And yeah, I would build it very differently, man. Jeez. There's so much. I would start smaller. I would need way less cash. We would have much lower burn. I would do way more of it myself. That's the other thing is I've realized as I've done more of this, I've come to just see how much me being in the weeds and in the details, I'm making different decisions. So I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, well, all right, well, we don't need all that stuff. We can just simplify this dramatically if we remove components, if we simplify it. And because I'm in the weeds, because I can ask questions any time of day, any time of night, I don't need to schedule a meeting. I'm not interrupting somebody else's work. Shits and giggles, I just have a question. I'm curious, wild idea. Hey, could we do this? And maybe I have to ask 3 different AIs to make sure that, I'm not just getting a hallucinated answer. But yeah, I would do it so differently, man. I would do most of the dev work myself, maybe have a contract designer, one engineer, one other engineer researcher, and I would purposely not try to be scaling up the team. Because that's the other thing is that as you add more people, the communication overhead, the role of you become less product craftsman and more, CEO. And the old way of thinking is like, well, that's what you have to do to build a great company.
Mm-hmm.
The only way you can get leverage is you get leverage by hiring more people. And so you develop this new skill set of managing other people so they can do great work and enable them. And I think with AI, man, it's really, you can flip that. It's how do you get more leverage yourself? How can you have more leverage? How can you have technology that lets you do stuff so you don't need people, right? And guess what? As a founder, maybe you think more creatively than the people you hire. You have the full context in your head, right? I mean, that's kind of what I've come to believe. So whether it's AI or people, having the full context of what you're trying to do in your head is so valuable. And when you
Mhm.
try to split things up across people or whatever where they don't have full context, you get a reduction in performance, you get misaligned, and it's really hard to give everyone the context. And so as a CEO, you need to spend a lot of energy, a lot of effort into giving everyone the context. I think a lot about now, how do I give AI the context? And how do I compress the information so it can fit in my brain and other people's brains, really in AI, in LM's brain, the context window. So reason over the whole thing and not just these little pieces. Um, and that's a challenge. I mean, like I said, I don't know if it's going to work, um, you know, but that's what I'm going for. And I'm having a blast doing it so far.
Why do you said a few times, I don't know if it's going to work. I feel like it's inevitable. No? Like it seems like you were writing the playbook for a new type of founder, which will be the prototype that every venture capitalist is looking for. Hell, I think Jesse, who we mentioned at the top of the show, Jesse, our mutual friend and investor, I think tweeted something today about looking for more AI native founders, teams of less than 5 people. Like this, you and I both founded our companies I think pre Chat GPT. Like I would do it, like you said, entirely differently than now. And I think a lot of founders who even like in that first wave of AI, that first bubble where they thought I need to raise a shit ton of money and I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, and we're going to have to build out this team. It's the landscape is changing so quickly. It seems like what you're describing is inevitable, and it's just a matter of like who's the first to figure out how to be this new breed of founder and what are you going to apply it to. Do you think there's a chance that this doesn't work, or is it more, or when you say that, are you saying like I don't know if it's going to work for TalkTastic because of the spaghetti monster that this approach is being thrown on top of?
Yeah, I think it's inevitable. The question is now, is it going to work now, and is it going to work on this problem?
Yeah.
Right, because I'm playing on like sort of extreme hard mode. If I was just building from scratch, that'd be much easier, much easier, because then I would actually know how the pieces work. I know what's there, right? You could start with something simple and build up, versus now I'm having to do all this sort of forensic investigation of what is this? How does this work? Why are these things happening?
Mhm.
And I also think there's a lot of hype around this stuff where building a prototype, building something, okay, yeah, you can do that with Cursor in an evening. Building something really good
Mhm.
and reliable and consistent, I haven't seen anybody do that yet.
Yeah.
Yes, it's inevitable, whether it's now, 6 months from now, 18 months from now, or whether like I'm just the first one. I don't know.
Yeah.
I want to have humility, because I also think in the way I think about these problems, whenever I am very honest with myself about how hard it is, then I end up thinking more critically about the solutions around what I'm doing and the strategy. And I end up doing a better job, if
Mhm.
that makes sense.
Yeah. That makes perfect sense.
Like if you just say like, oh yeah, it's easy, of course I'm gonna win. Chances that you're gonna win probably go down. But if you say, oh, I don't know if this is gonna work, so I better fucking go
Yeah.
bananas. I better go ham and be paranoid to make it work. Then the chances go up. Like look at Elon. Elon talks about his businesses. He's like, yeah, there's a less than 10% chance that this is going to work. SpaceX, these other things, and because of that paranoia, you end up making different decisions, and it forces you to think differently and to be more critical and self-critical. And I think it raises the stakes for you and the people around you. And I think that actually makes for better companies, better processes, better products.
Mm-hmm. I know we're coming up on time, so I want to ask the question that I'm positive that we're going to get on every social media post that comes out about this episode. What resources, if people who want to do what you're doing, what resources have you used that you recommend? How would you recommend for others to try to do the same, to try to do what you're doing? Where should they start?
Great question. If you want to do what I'm doing, use Claude projects, create different projects for every thing that you're doing. Use Cursor, which people probably already know about, but use them in combination. Use Claude projects for the bigger, higher level architecture and systems thinking. Use Cursor for code completion and for everyday coding. I built a open source tool called Flatty. It's on GitHub. It's github.com/Matt Mireles/Flatty. You can basically go to any directory on your computer, any code base, and it'll flatten it into a simple text file that you can upload to Claude or any sort of LLM. It's really useful because otherwise you just end up with too many files and it won't, you run out of space. I also use Perplexity. Perplexity has a product that not a lot of people know about called Spaces, which is very similar to Claude projects. And I have Perplexity Spaces for like debugging niche issues, especially on newer versions of software. And I use a very similar prompting system that I use for Claude. You can upload files there. You can also give it links. And then if you really want to do things with lots of context or need a lot of tokens, I use Google AI Studio. And right now, Gemini 1.5 Pro has the biggest context window. I think it's 2 million of anything out there that I've seen. Who knows, that might change tomorrow. But I use that stack and I go back and forth between them. And because I don't trust any one of them to be accurate, I do a lot of triangulation because I know the nature of these systems are probabilistic. And so you have help. You have it's like having a lot of really smart people who are kind of unreliable. Mm-hmm. And so you have to be able to use your instinct and triangulate amongst these different sources of unreliable superintelligence that we all have access to. And that's been my playbook. And we'll see if it works. It's working so far.
This has been one of the most fun conversations, most fun podcast recordings I've gotten to have yet, Matt. I can't thank you enough for how open, like, you were doing amazing things and you're also just sharing so openly about it, publishing to open source. It's wild. One of my first interviews when I started doing this podcast was actually with Jeff Busking at Flybridge, and he was writing a book. He's written a book about finding product market fit in a time of AI, and the juxtaposition. I have to go back, and once we publish this, I need to listen to them side by side. They're probably about 6-8 months apart, but it's wild to hear the types of things he was envisioning and the types of things that you're doing now it's just fascinating to see you doing what people were imagining might possibly be done, whatever, 8+ months ago, and how fast things are changing and accelerating in the space. In the show notes for this, I'm going to drop links to everything that you mentioned. Most importantly, I'm also going to make sure I drop a link to where you can download TalkTastic, which you didn't mention there at the end, but probably the most important part of making all this work is not having to type it all fucking out and getting to just speak it and have it accurately and contextually aware go into all these different tools. So we'll drop a link to TalkTastic. I'll also be sure to drop a link to your new Substack, Accelerate or Die, where you can read that article about how you fired your team and went down the path of doing all this. Anywhere else, I'll drop LinkedIn to anywhere else that people should be following you and follow along with your journey and TalkTastic's journey.
Twitter,
Cool.
at Matt Mireles on Twitter.
Awesome. Matt, thank you so much. Huge fan of what you're doing. Absolutely fascinating stuff. So much for me to take back to my startup, and I'm sure for others listening to as well. So thanks again. This was awesome.
Thank you.